Poke, poke. Is this thing on? Hey, hey. Hey, Nathan, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm great. Today, you're going to define faith for us. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Take
So
it
I,
away.
I wanted I wanted today to be kind of like, I know we were doing this like trilogy. It will end up being I plan to make this the last one that's focused on, sort of what I believe.
Hmm.
And I wanted to take the time today to pretty much look at faith as an entire component to Christian structure of beliefs and how it played a role in mine as well.
Hmm.
And I think it's just important to shed light on something that can oftentimes get misconstrued.
Hmm. Good. Yes, faith is definitely one of those areas where people get tripped up, especially if they are insisting that one meaning of faith means another, and there's lots of ways to use that word badly and wrong in conversation.
Yeah.
So tell me the good thing.
So, well, I'll start off with like the fact that I mean Christianity or Christianese, as
Hmm.
I like to say, uses faith so broadly, and it's
Hmm.
like it's partly our own issue as to why, or it's our own fault to its misconstruence outside of our
Hmm.
religion, and even within the context of our religion, the idea of faith, I think, is very broad because it's used. The way I've seen it used is two big ways. It's like to define your belief structure, but also as a categorical term to just consider all of what you believe. Like, oh, I
Hmm.
have a good amount of faith. Like, like you can just say that as a means to defining where you're structurally at in your journey. But as it related to me, sorry, I always forget to silence my notifications on my laptop because I am on my
Oh, good point. I will put
it's
my phone in do not disturb mode.
Yeah, I have my phone turned off, but it's always annoying because my laptop is connected to my phone, so it has its own
Mhm.
alerts, and you can't just silence those alerts. You have to do them individually for each contact. Uh,
Oh,
so I apologize for that. But anyways,
okay.
I wanted to start off with saying that the way faith sort of was relative to me and how I developed was like I grew up under loving Christian parents, and
Mhm.
they bestowed in me the love of God, and it changed my perspective like over the course of my maturation,
Mhm.
so that my personhood was so like rooted in his goodness that I could be 100% sure that there is something great within knowing and following God. And this is the personal experience that is not communicatable, and
Mhm.
that I think between other people. And I'll go into later detail on that and define what I really consider that to be. But like a lot of people's personal experiences with the unseen aspects
Mhm.
to my religion is very difficult to communicate to people who have never really tried it out or never given it a fair shot. And so, but I still think it's important. That's why I focus a lot of my like arguments on the
Mhm.
logic and understanding.
Sure.
But I think this is like just as important to cover in terms of like what it really means, and you know how it can play a role in somebody's individual convictions to the religion.
Okay. When you say convictions, I think that's a Christianese. Most of the time when somebody talks about convictions, it's like illegal and it's not a fun thing. And
Yeah.
and I think in what you mean, whether it's fun or not, it's the thing that you are certain of.
Yeah, so I want to define conviction in the way that I plan to use it. I mean,
Okay.
I oftentimes look at it as like if you're convicted to do something, there it's like a strong testament to your will to do something. Like and like it's like
Mhm.
I don't know, it's sort of
A strong
immaterial.
commitment to
Yeah,
do
it's
it.
like but I think it's also like an element of immaterial quality because if you have a conviction to do something, there may
Mhm.
not be a logical backing or procedural sense and reason to develop that
Does it
conviction.
matter if there is or not?
No, I don't think so. I think you can have convictions that are based in reason, but
Okay.
oftentimes in Christianity, it's referable to the way that God provides us with convictions.
Yes.
Like you can have a sense. It oftentimes in Christianese it's used as like a sense because you were pointing out
Yeah.
how it's oftentimes used differently.
Yeah. I would say that
And
for myself, conviction, I have 2 areas where I would resonate with what you're saying. One is my public work thinking that critical thinking improves the next generation. Therefore, hey, Danish debater. It, therefore, I am convicted to continue doing my critical thinking work in public. Now, like on my private side, I am very committed to the relationship in my family. It serves me, I serve them, and that's a long term commitment. So
yeah,
I'm using the term commitment, but I think I'm using it in very much the sense that you are for conviction. And in this case, it's a strongly held, very solidly willed commitment. Yes?
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. It's a commitment and um yeah, a commitment, in different ways. Uh yeah. But I saw somebody said in the Sapir, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, said my
They're all
oldest
big.
brother has a lot
Mhm.
of felony convictions.
Yeah. That might be a joke, and whichever way.
Hopefully it is. I hope your your brother isn't.
Either way, if it's just reality, that's it.
Yeah.
I
Um,
have friends that are ex-felons or felons or, you know, they're not in prison anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, moving forward, I
Mhm.
already saw somebody put in, I think, a definition. Sasha said,
Uh-huh.
like, his current definition of faith is the willingness to act as if without evidence. And I actually 100% agree with that. I
Mhm.
have it put in my own words. I think,
Yeah.
I,
I
I
I
said,
wanna modify this one
oh
because what
yeah,
you were telling me was not without evidence, but without sufficient evidence to get certainty, but acting as if certain. So that
yeah. So
it's
yeah,
just whatever is filling that gap between the things that you read that you got to by other means and
Yeah, that's how I was
the
gonna define it.
feeling
He
that
he
that
he kinda
conviction.
defined it looks like it's as if without evidence, and,
Mhm.
like, I do agree with your sorry, I guess I probably glossed over it when I should have had a little bit more, notation to what he was saying because I do
Mhm.
disagree with that sense that it's not entirely accurate to how I would define it, but basically, in my own words and my definition would be, like, to say faith is a counterpart to observation and reason as it combines
Okay.
with those to formulate a conclusion or belief. Um, because, I recognize that there is limitations to reason and observation.
Mhm.
To the furthest extent, you could say that you really can't
Yeah.
know anything except, what you think, and that is who you are, and, like, that famous philosophical quote I always like to mention, "I think, therefore I am," like,
Mhm.
that idea as being the only sole thing that you can really be certain of, and that's just because as humanity, like a feature of humanity is faith. You have to have faith in your eyes just to see things accurately. And we have all these different types of illusions to show the shortcomings in just what we rely so heavily on. Like the one sense that we probably rely on the most is our sight. Obviously not for everybody because not everybody has good
No,
eyesight or any eyesight at all.
it's a relative thing, and it
Yeah, yeah,
depends
yeah.
on
But,
context. Yes,
I
sure.
mean, for people with good
Right,
vision,
very
we
important.
rely heavily on our eyesight, and there are already shortcomings to just that in itself. So, I like
Mhm.
to look at faith as a necessary component to really
Okay.
believing in everything or believing in anything.
Hmm.
And so the
I
balance
believe
between how much
something.
faith and how much observation you have to reach a very strong conclusion is, I think, what's
Okay.
relative to
If
Christianity.
if I'm gonna throw a bunch of dice, how much faith do I have to believe that some of those dice will come up 6?
How much faith? Well, you say have to believe. Have to believe for what? Like
So,
to
I'm gonna bet money. I'm gonna bet you lunch that I have a stack of dice. I'm gonna throw it, and at least one of them is gonna come up 6. Now, I think if there was something like 4 to 6 dice in the cup, if that's maybe an even bet, right? Would you agree? If
Yeah.
there's 400 dice in the cup, you're buying lunch?
Yeah.
Probably? Okay. So how much faith do I need to bet lunch on a cup of dice?
So, taking that question, I look at faith as like a compositional component to every belief, and so the
Mhm.
amount that you need is always relative to the amount of observation and reason you have,
Okay.
and it's in a defined like, you would have to also draw a line to how strong of a conclusion you wanna bring yourself to.
I'm
So you
betting lunch.
said 400 dice,
Yeah,
like, there I mean, in you have your own preconception as to how much like, how strong of a belief you would have to have in order to bet the money or the
sure.
lunch that you would want to. So, like, obviously, if you only threw 1 dice and it had to be a 6 for me to buy lunch, you
Yeah,
may not have a strong enough conviction to make that bet because it's not fair odds.
I would agree.
And so, I mean, saying, okay, if I have 400 dice, how much you would have to have? Well, how much you would have to have for a conclusive, and you would have to define exactly how
Yeah,
strong a conclusion you have. But as a compositional component, alongside observation, reason, and in this case, also like mathematics as it would apply to reason, you can then utilize that to build your own strength in
okay.
conclusion. And so this would not take a lot of faith. If you had 400 dice and you rolled all of them and you needed 1 6, I
Yeah,
mean, math tells you that, you can rely very heavily in reason to
yeah,
establish that, you may not need as much, like, faith is not as large of a
yeah.
component in this
It's
balance of.
it's 5, 6 raised to the power of 400, which turns out to be a very small number of times that I'm gonna buy lunch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, simply put, let's say that I don't mind buying you lunch and I would think buying you lunch is the same risk as getting lunch bought. So maybe I would give you lunch on odd numbers and me lunch on even numbers.
Mhm.
I'm happy to take a 50-50 bet. Was there any faith in that?
So, in the 50, I like this like, this question because I think it defines a different scenario because this is very relative, I think, to Christianity because this is where you will actually see a change in faith development in a religious context versus a random context. In a random context where you truly believe it's just a flip of a coin, 50-50, odd, even, your result is not going to be
Yeah. I'm
determined.
obviously choosing the lowest stakes hypothetical
Yeah,
possible.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and so, like, in this situation, you probably would have a very, uh it would be a limited, like, can I guess I can use conviction in
Sure.
this to believe, it'd be a limited level of conviction in
Mhm.
you
Very small.
believing that it's going to be even
Right.
as a result of not having that additional faith component to believe that there's additional elements at play. So, like,
Yeah.
you don't have any there's no like, this is
I'm
where it
choosing
gets kind of.
the only faith I have in this is
Sorry, what was
faith.
that?
The only faith that I think I have, if I just hey, faith distinct from my, like, inductive observations and willingness to take risks. The only faith I seem to have is that, I guess it's 2 parts. 1, that the dice is fair. Dice is fair, meaning that it will
Mhm,
actually
yep,
give me a random,
yep,
and that, I guess the other faith is the faith in you and I that we will follow through with lunch.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Are those faiths are those the kind of faith you mean that are is
yes.
helpful and important? Great,
Yeah,
then I
those
have
those
that
are
faith.
2 things, and I think my definition lacked, an a part of it, which is actually in the biblical definition, which I have for reference, but it's that faith is for the unseen as well, and I think that's where it's like, it's your reasonability when it comes to interpreting what you can't see, basically, like the unseen in a metaphorical sense and literal sense most times. But, like,
Uh-huh.
for this instance, like, obviously you can see the dice and you have so
Mhm.
much observational experience to believe that, when you roll the dice are going to drop out of your hand and physics is going to apply as it always has. And, but you don't see or know for sure the weight of the dice if they are fair or not.
Mhm.
And you don't know if your partner is going to abide by your contract, your
Right.
agreement. And so, and those two things, those would be the unseen, and that's where faith plays a larger role. But it's such a complicated thing to tackle because there is still reason and logic that goes into developing faith, and that's where things start to overlap a little bit. I've seen because, like, even as I went to start explaining faith, or the component that I would designate to what would be faith in this instance, that uh, I ran into saying, well, you wouldn't have any reason to believe that. And it's like, well, now you're saying, oh, there has to be reason for faith too. So is there any difference? And that's where it's like, I can already see how I may be confusing somebody, because if I'm on the other end of this call and I'm like looking, listening to myself say this for the first time, I can understand myself being confused
Okay.
by,
Let me
by,
ask questions then. I can prompt you and see if we can come up with a definition that makes sense to the audience. There are overlapping terms for faith. One would be trust.
yes.
I trust you to follow through with the thing. What other terms overlap with faith?
So faith overlaps with trust, and then I think it also does not as much as trust, but with reason, it overlaps with reason, as reason can be an element to developing faith. It's like, okay, I have reason to believe that this has happened before, so
Okay.
I'm going to have faith in that reason to it continuing in its pattern.
Uh-huh.
So, like, at least it's overlapped in the way that you would use it from
Mhm.
a language perspective, because it's like, you have to have faith to believe in the reason that would establish your conclusions for things like, I have
So you
faith that
have
every time
faith
I drop
in
the dice, they fall into the earth.
you have to have faith in the underlying epistemology, the reason behind the reason.
Yeah,
Why that reason is the kind of thing that leads you to think a thing is true.
right.
Like,
And so
I
that's
can
where
count a
I don't
thing
know.
and then you count a thing. Like, if I count some money and then I say, "Here, please count this stack of money," and you count the money and it comes out the same, my confidence goes up that I counted it right.
Mhm.
Yeah, like
Yep.
that.
And yeah, that's where it doesn't overlap the same way that it does with trust. It just overlaps in the way that,
Well,
when
I
I
also
use
have to
it
trust that
throughout
you
this.
were correct, but I didn't tell you my number, which means I didn't have to have as much trust.
Yeah,
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 but it will come
exactly.
out to a whole dollar because I only handed you paper. It'll come out to an integer.
Yeah. Alright, so, the other thing I wanted to, acknowledge, I can't find it in my notes for some reason, but there's actually a verse. I remember the number, I don't know why. Hold on. Hebrew
Hebrews 11:1?
Yeah, 11:1
Yes.
defines faith.
Yes.
For some
I'll,
reason, I swear I wrote it down, but, like,
that's fine.
I don't
I'll
know
grab
what
it.
and I wanted to reference that definition in looking for, because getting it laid out, what faith, like, literally means is nice when you're trying to then use it to explain how it's applied.
Yes. Ta-da. Let me make this smaller. You don't need to have a whole screen. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Do you have a preferred version? Sorry, I'm not
ESV is probably my preferred version. I like ESV as something that's secularly translated to just be the most accurate.
ESV. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
Yeah,
Okay, so I hear two things. One, it's hoped for things you want to be true.
yes,
Okay, and if faith is the conviction of things not seen. Uh,
yes.
is that two different things, or is that one thing?
So I find this definition really interesting because it features that element of hope,
Uh-huh.
and I don't entirely understand what it means in this context. And I have another component to today that I want to talk about,
Sure.
which features somebody else's interpretation to
Okay.
this, that he reaches a conclusion I disagree with, and
All right.
that is to focus on hope. But yeah, I do think that, like, if I read through this, like, faith is the assurance of things hoped for.
Yes.
So it's like, if you are hoping for something, like, you're hoping for it on account that you have faith that it's going to come true. And
That's
so I don't think that hope is a necessary component, but is oftentimes like an example in which faith is, like, needed for it. So it's like the other way around. Like, faith is needed for hope.
Do you have any
But
faith in something that you hope was not true?
do you have any faith in something, like, sorry, could you reword that or repeat that?
Do you have any faith in something that you hope is not true, that you would wish were not true? Like, do you have faith that
Yeah, I think
something has
that
power in your life or
yeah,
some
I think that applies the same way, for things that you hope are not true, um, which is like, I mean, you can just reword that as true for the thing, you can like, if I hope that it's not true that my water bottle is empty, it's
right.
like I can hope that it's true that my water bottle has water in it at the end. Like
Uh-huh.
I think the wording of how you utilize truth in that sense is not changing the meaning. You know what I mean?
Okay. So, like your faith in is that negative example that Satan has power in your life, for example, something that I can use? Does that make sense?
That negative example, yeah, but, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't modify the meaning because I
Right.
can
I think
reword the same
I
sentence
think
for it to be like, "Oh, I hope that it is true that."
yeah, I think you could hope that it was true because it's part of a larger thing that you hope is true.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so it is still something that you hope is true, that your worldview is correct.
Mhm, yeah,
Okay. So you hope that your worldview is correct. It's something you want it to be. And then you have a conviction to act, a conviction in this case, meaning a commitment born of your reason plus the gap of faith to action, to act on those things that you hope are true.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and so, now I don't wanna I think we're crossing into potentially a circular definition if you involve faith
Possibly.
within conviction because like, I think conviction may operate a little bit separate to the like, because you said conviction
Well,
itself would be the balance between faith and reason, but then that would contradict the definition like, the definition then because it's like, "Oh, well, faith can't be
yeah.
also the balance like, faith can't involve the balance with faith itself," you know what I mean? Like,
I
because it
might
has to
be bringing in something from a conversation I had over the weekend. Someone brought to me a definition of faith in the Steelman practice on Saturday, and I really
be
liked it. It was very much like yours. That in this case, their definition of faith was that gap. They
Yeah,
said they have reason and they have faith, and
mhm,
they have something like commitment from the whole thing. But they were very clear that faith was the gap, not the
yes.
reason part.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay,
Um,
then we're good, and they encouraged me to do that, and that was one of those, SEs where the exit was, "You've convinced me. I agree." That and the claim was that if we used this definition, it would improve communication across lines.
yeah, I think it
I am
absolutely will.
convinced that that is true, that if we use your definition and their definition in the overlap, that we will improve our communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
And so I want to move into, I mentioned earlier as like a precursor to what I'm explaining now that
Yes, please.
somebody I watched. Have you ever heard of Ren and Link from Good Mythical Morning?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I've
So
been following their, like, yearly
yes,
Yes.
yes. I
things.
just
I
recently watched
haven't been a fan otherwise, I haven't warmed to them, but otherwise, I've been very interested in listening to their yearly recaps.
yeah. So I just recently watched. Like I finished it last night. I think his Rhett's latest spiritual deconstruction that they posted in the spring of this year.
Okay,
And, I follow Red a lot because I find that he thinks a lot like I do,
okay.
and then we've just reached different conclusions.
Mhm,
But I thought that his conclusion surrounding faith in his most recent episode
mhm.
was on a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of that verse that we just looked at, the one that
Okay.
involves hope. And so he basically, I have a couple quotes from that live stream. One of those is he said, "You can't prove it. So at some point, you have to take a leap of faith." And like he
Yep,
acknowledges that most things can't be proven and that for that reason he
okay.
considers faith a feature of humanity. That
Alright.
was his word. So he considers it a
Yeah,
feature of humanity in the same way that I, introduced the topic coming into today, where like you have to have faith in everything, basically, and to some
okay.
extent. Um,
So if I head across the town and I jump on the subway, I expect that I have about a 95% chance of making my round trip without having to go to plan B for transportation.
yeah,
Do I have
yeah,
faith in that 5%?
yes. I
Good.
mean, again, it's always like compositional. Like you can still be 95% sure and leave it at that and not have any faith. Like or like, because
I
you,
can?
if you have you can have 95% of a conclusion, like you
Yes.
can be 95% certain of something on
Yes.
account of reason alone.
Sure.
But to
You
reach
can
100,
induce based
faith
on how many times I've taken the subway. Mhm.
faith is a necessary gap to reach any 100% conclusion, because it's like,
Okay.
I can, like, if you are, uh, yeah, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna
I agree with you.
example and then kind of fell through
I
in my.
don't actually have any conclusions that I hold at 100%. So, that might be an example of me lacking faith.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that that's a very valid way of looking at it, like,
Okay.
yeah, that's exactly right. That's why you don't always need to have faith that you're gonna reach a place on time, because you may not be certain that you will reach that place on time,
Sure.
if that makes sense. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but then when he was, so going back to Rhett here, he talked as if faith was only applicable to situations where you get to choose what you want to believe in. He focused on that word, like, want, that desire, because
Uh-huh.
he looked at that definition from the Bible as, assurance for things hoped for, and then interpreted that as hope being necessary for establishing what you have faith in. And
Yes. It
basically,
does seem to be.
yeah, he established like this sort of creative liberty that you have to place your faith in what you want,
Mhm.
and that is the like defining characteristic of where, well, of what you believe, basically. Like, and
Yeah.
I he's on a similar track to what I would have established without ever having watched his stream. Um, but I still fundamentally disagree with the continuation of his conclusions on account
Okay.
of that desire, because he then moves in. I have two more quotes here that I'm just going to quickly reference.
Yes,
He
please.
says, "Faith is a bridge we can use to travel." This is his definition, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, Faith is a bridge we can use to travel from the limits of reason to a confident conclusion of what we hope to be true. So
Mhm.
there, his definition features that idea of hope. And
Mhm.
then he says, his like in Rhett's terms, he says, you gotta want to believe that Jesus rose from the dead to make the final leap to it.
Okay.
It's got to be this thing that you want to be true, and then you believe it to be true. So he basically says you have to want to believe Jesus rose for you to believe it to be true.
Yes.
And that's the extension of conclusion that I disagree with. I do not think that you have to want Jesus to have risen from the dead to believe that, because it's like, I mean, you can obviously choose that you don't want to believe something and then just dismiss yourself from, like, following through with maybe some of the logical and reason components that might go into whether or not it's true. But
Uh-huh.
like, I think like conceptualizing desire within faith is difficult and like dicey to do, because it's like, if you are it I think it's just more than what you want, because it's like, oh, like, you know I'm trying to I think this is a good opportunity to bring in where I think conviction starts to differ from
Mhm.
Christianity and regular secular usage, because
Okay.
conviction is something that is oftentimes considered from God. Like,
Yes.
God can provide you with convictions, and that's the additional elemental component to faith that is not personally derived. Like, I may have faith in something, and
Yes.
whether or not I want it to be true may not be entirely necessary, because God has provided me the conviction to reach that
Yes.
additional faith component. And yeah, I think that's where things start
Yeah.
to that
So,
break down
two
for me.
outsiders, and you can pick whichever one you wanna do first. One of them is religious and one of them isn't. Which one do you want?
So you're saying two, how do you mean?
I'm
Like,
gonna give you 2 outsider people to compare their perspective on this to
I,
yours.
okay, I do the non-religious then.
Non-religious, okay. So, I imagine that I've got a really autistic atheist who's really focused on this year for 23, they're trying to get rid of all faith and see if they can function in the world. They're testing that chest, whether faith is necessary. Uh, how much can they get rid of using any faith and still make appropriate actions? Are they stopped? This is on anybody's bingo card, this would be the Pyrrhic skeptic, just for jargon.
Okay. So I would say absolutely they can function. It's just that they may either fully, even if they fully recognize what I believe to be going on,
Mhm,
and if they don't, the conclusions would still be the same. Like they simply would not be able to believe anything with absolute certainty.
mhm.
And so if they recognize that, then that's fine. I mean, you can function with the 99.9%
Yep.
belief that your eyes are giving you what you see.
Yes.
Like that, you don't need that additional faith component to be that 100% sure. And like you can remove that from things and still live life completely normal at above an 80%
Yeah.
reason component to whatever you establish as something you believe. Like, um, so like, or
You are
whatever.
completely describing a friend of mine who just worked for Virgin Orbit until they went bankrupt. Absolutely no certainty on anything. Everything is like, "Yeah, we're not sure about this. Here's the part that I don't know the most about." It's great
Yeah.
stuff.
So, from that sense, faith isn't necessary for someone's functionality. It's just necessary to say anything is true. I think
Okay.
with 100% certainty, and it's like, um,
Is saying things are true important?
I think that I think that saying things, I don't know. So it's I think it always depends on the situation because if something needs to be true that you can't experience all, like if you need something to be true, for instance, a God that exists that will like save you and let you live eternally if you believe in him, if something
Mhm.
like that were to be true, well then obviously faith is an extremely important component because you would want to be able to say this is true. You need to be 100% certain that something like that is true, and you will not have the percentile component that will come from reason and logic purely that will reach that point of certainty. So, like, there is a necessary component of faith that is important for certain things that are beyond the seen, and in metaphorical sense, it's beyond what you can like observe. And if it is important to be true, then yes, there is importance.
Mhm.
But if that weren't to be true, then there wouldn't be importance in saying anything is definitively true because you can just establish, okay, something is true within a certain percentile, and as soon as something reaches above 99%, you can just consider it mostly true and then move on with your day without ever
Yeah.
having that extra small molecular, like
Yeah.
small atomically tiny component of faith for most things.
Yeah, it gets back to how many dice are in that cup.
Yeah, exactly. Like if
Exactly.
you had a million dice in that cup and you needed it to be six, like you don't
Yeah.
need a lot of faith for that to be true. Now, I think that
Yeah.
philosophically and technically, you can't say that you are 100% certain because you still need a little bit of faith that's still unseen. But it's like it's not
Yeah.
a workable.
Unless you're just fine with the risk, and then it
Yeah,
doesn't matter. Yeah.
yeah.
So, I have a couple of questions, that I'm gonna fold into, uh, the next outsider, and that would be suppers. Is faith different, significantly different from belief commitment? Actually, let me just ask this as a separate question. What do you say about faith being significantly different from belief commitment? Is that a good, synonym?
Let me think for a second. Yeah, I think that's well, okay. So I'm sorry, I'm still working through it in my head.
Take it.
If you consider it belief commitment, to me that sounds like the like your strength of a belief.
Mhm.
And so I would not consider that to be the same thing, like entirely synonymous with faith, because as
Ah,
as I mentioned before, it's a compositional, like you always have reason logic. So
right.
like you can have a lot of faith in something without any logic, and it still be less than something that is all logic and reason without any faith. Because it's
So I have two twin brothers. They grew up together. They're both religious. They both believe the same things. One of them has gone into, I don't know, STEM fields or something and has gotten really studious.
yeah,
And that one has reinforced their beliefs up to about 60%. The first brother only has about 30% reason and 60% faith. When they on their 18th birthday, they're both at 100%. Okay? Does one brother have stronger faith than the other?
No.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Stronger faith. I thought you were gonna say stronger belief commitment, like,
Nope.
because they could both
Stronger
be
faith.
equally committed.
It's about
Um,
the definition of faith. That's why I'm
so
digging
yeah,
now.
so this is gonna be the next part of that I'm gonna
Mhm.
go into, which is going to be the Christian element
Yeah.
of what it means to grow in your faith.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a misconception that growing in faith from the Christian perspective means establishing more faith to your I guess universal belief that God exists and that Jesus rose from the dead. We'll say that's like the pivotal
Mhm.
component to being a Christian or not. So that belief, you don't grow in your faith towards that belief by removing any type of logic and reason as a component to establishing commitment to that belief. Growing in faith is like this is one of the most important distinctions that I
Mhm.
plan on making today, which is that when you grow in your faith, it's saying that you are allowing for more gap in situations where there is less reason to go
Okay.
on. And this is where it starts to overlap in trust because if I'm growing in my faith with God and Jesus Christ and
Mhm.
the man in the sky and I want him to provide for me financially this summer, yeah, I
Mhm.
I have a large amount of logic and reason to believe he exists, but now all of a sudden I don't have a large logic and reason that he's going to follow through in providing for me financially. And
Right.
so like if I am strong in my faith, then that
Yeah.
means that I can afford a larger gap to reach 100% conclusive trust in
Yes.
him for this additional component that runs throughout your Christianity, which is like trusting him.
Yes. Okay.
And
Very
so,
good.
like, that's where you can say that's where, like, comparing somebody between, like, their faith and logic and their universal belief that Jesus exists, that would not be somebody having stronger faith, in my opinion, because
Mhm.
it would be like that is something separate to what is oftentimes like faith is used in Christianity. Like faith is oftentimes used for something different, not for that pivotal belief point,
Yeah.
if that makes
Bjorn
sense.
Bjorn asks, "Is faith the bridge between confidence and believing the full 100%?" And I think that is
Yes.
correct. Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. So now the next outsider I'd like you to help me make. Please pick a religion or a worldview that is just enough outside of yours that they are wrong. Tell me what that is.
I like well, okay. Okay, I will go with red. Okay, if I think of something that's a little bit closer,
Ret is not religious, though.
I
Ret
know
is
you said wrong.
oh,
So I disagree with, right?
oh, right. I'm thinking of something much closer, like a
That's
religion that you think is wrong.
right. No, well, I like the idea of Rhett because
Okay.
I know a lot about Rhett, and his division in what I believe is very small, but results in a drastically different conclusion because of what, like, because I look at, a lot of like what we believe to be true as also
Mhm.
like a tree of webs of things like, oh, this is true, this is true, this is
Sure.
true, this is true.
They
You
tie
have
together.
a small division, and then it can all of a sudden branch out and be very far apart.
Yes.
Um,
And that right there, that's the epistemology that I'm digging for.
yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So with Rhett, I think that our biggest division, and it is small in stature, I would
Okay.
consider, is
Small
is
division, big result.
yeah, at least
Like
at
one
least with
singular point of division.
yeah, at least with I'm also making this a little bit isolated to
Mhm.
one of his components because he has a lot
That's fine.
that is part of where he's reached now as a no longer Christian who's deconverted.
Mhm.
But in his, like, I want to focus on the faith thing because it definitionally his only difference is that he thinks hope is a necessary component and that desire is what establishes what we believe in. But then from that small difference, he then
Mhm.
establishes a conclusion vastly different than mine, which is that you can believe in whatever you want,
Okay.
basically. And that the only limitations is what you consider is harmful or good to believe in. Like he said,
Ah.
You
Okay,
shouldn't
so
believe. You shouldn't want to
he's
believe
choosing a
in.
more, noble truth there, that it doesn't matter whether it's actually true, it matters the effects of it
Yes.
as
Right.
as his okay.
And so
Great.
he took that creative liberty from that simple misinterpretation of the I believe to be
Okay,
misinterpretation of the definition from the Bible, and then
okay,
use that to say, "Oh, I can believe." And like one of the things that he mentioned, which was very out there, and he established that too, was that he thinks that creativity may be an actual existent, like maybe something that is in existence apart from humanity that we can tap into
okay.
as living beings, and so that like if we can have the same exact idea because we tapped into create like this cloud of creativity um
Hmm,
at the same time at the same point, and
yeah.
that gave us the same idea. So like it's basically saying that all creative thoughts could be derived from an
Mhm,
actual physical location that is somewhere, and like maybe
mhm.
not something locationally relevant, but like metaphysically a part of our reality, and that
My
it's not
friend
even a
Desired is writing a fiction book that sounds a lot like that. That's fun.
yeah, yeah. And so that is something that he said that he can want to believe, and that doesn't hurt his perspective, so that he's like, okay, this isn't a nobility like issue, like it's
Mhm.
not unnoble. I don't know what the word is. It's
Ignoble,
not. It
not
is.
anti-noble, right? Or
Yeah. It's
in
not. I'll say moral. It's not immoral or
okay.
harmful to believe this. So it's okay for him to want to believe it, and that's I find that interesting as something because that all derives pretty much in the sense of faith and belief from his simple miscommunication or misunderstanding that hope is necessary.
Mhm,
Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question to the way that you expected it to, but I consider that a decent example for how somebody who believes something very different, like like similar, can still reach a very different conclusion in the similar topic. Now, it's not exactly relative to Christianity, but like it is to faith, and so yeah.
mhm. Okay. Um, let's see. Let me go for a different religion outsider because the Rhett thing, I appreciate that perspective, and I wanna focus on that one hope thing and make the hope the same thing.
Okay,
So, imagine you've got a friend, his name is Muhammad. I'm gonna let you fill in all the rest.
okay, okay. So, um, is this somebody that is similar in their um you're saying that Muhammad is some
They have the same level of faith conviction as you. They have the same ideas about what faith means as you. They accept your definition of faith.
yes, okay.
The worldview that they hope for does not have Jesus having died on the cross, but is the Muslim interpretation of having gone up to the middle heaven and the thing with the and so on. And they think Jesus is a prophet and not a god, and that Muhammad is a prophet and Allah is the writer of the Quran. Something like that.
And, you what do you want me to explain about this scenario? Like,
So
how
they
they
have the same amount of faith in terms they have the same conviction.
yeah, and
They have the same amount of reason that supports other things, so they have the same gap of faith to reach their action. Tell me about their faith and their hope about their worldview being
okay.
affected.
So, this is something I think is the unique and very unfortunate scenario where I don't think they're obviously, I believe that his worldview would be wrong because he doesn't believe in what I do, and I believe what I believe to be true. So I would say that it's not devised in a his issue is not in faith, but in the logic and reason. Um, but
So you
also,
have bad logic and reason.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But I think the logic and reason supports my view over his, so that there's then an issue in where his logic and reason is formulated, and it could be, if you're looking at the tree, it could be one belief that has its own balance of faith and logic and reason that he glossed over and just slapped faith onto and didn't really investigate that reason and logic, And
Mhm.
so one small notch on the tree is what then caused him to branch out in a different
Okay.
sense. And that if somebody with the correct again,
Yeah.
assuming what I believe is true, would then go into his tree, his web of beliefs, and
Okay.
find that point that he's wrong and diagnose it essentially,
Very
as
good.
like from a doctor metaphor,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and then
So
look
it
at it
sounds
and
like
say,
faith
hey,
is not the area to fix. Faith
sorry.
isn't the issue to fix.
No, yeah,
The issue
faith
to
isn't
fix
the issue
the
here.
fundamental epistemology that led them to believing things were true for bad reasons.
Mhm,
Okay.
right. And so they can reach um, a a point that is different from mine because of something like that. And that's where it becomes slightly difficult because I also had another thing that I wanted to mention today, which
Go for
was
it.
personal experience as it
Yes.
relates to somebody's eventual conclusions.
Yeah.
And those personal experiences, which are not communicatable to others,
Uh-huh.
um, could be something that's part of his web because he has misinterpreted individual
Okay.
instances within his personal experience and attributed that to something that is not the case as opposed to something that is the case. So like it would be like saying, okay, like my engine is running great while I'm in like you're driving a car and you're
Uh-huh.
racing it and your engine, isn't running great and like you may think, okay, this personal experience is because um yeah, this is gonna be an example that kind of
Yeah.
like it looks bad for my religion, but you could say, "Oh, God crushed my engine," like,
Mhm.
and said, "My engine's not working because I didn't pray to God this morning." And then you could pull it in a lot and realize, no, it's just because some numbskull didn't tighten the screw correctly on one of the pistons and now it all went kaput. Like you're establishing reason in something else and there was actually a more true component to it. And obviously that looks bad because it's like, okay, well, I believe in God. So like there could be an instance where I fall short in establishing something
Mhm.
correctly to God where it actually was more so in the, ordinary that in the
Yeah.
experience in the observable. And so like you can make like I can be just as uh susceptible to that same
Okay.
misassociation
Yeah.
uh, as anybody else. It's just that like I mean, we're imperfect people trying to believe, the true
Mhm.
thing. And that's where like uh you can have that certainly occur within somebody who is following a completely different worldview and religion.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where like in Christianity, I mean, without going into the morality of things, I believe in annihilation
Mhm.
as the punishment for people. And so in that sense, the creative liberty of God would be to say that for those individuals who have misunderstood and had those misassociations, their worldview is just then terminated once they die, and like they, follow suit in the natural process of life as energy is recycled and things within our universe. Like that occurs to that individual. Obviously, it's a shame that they didn't find the truth that could result in their long living eternal,
Mhm.
like salvation with Jesus Christ in heaven.
Sure.
But that it's just it's a fundamental component to how our world works. And so I believe that with anybody, if you spend enough time with them to find their tree, their web of things, and find that individual thing
Yeah.
that was
That thing. There's
mistaken, you
Mhm.
can then, basically cure
Yeah.
that. I sound like a nut, but like you can
No, no,
cure
that would be correct.
their structure of things.
Within your worldview, if you manage to convert me to your worldview by pointing out where I had something wrong and I agreed with you, you win. That is excellent, and I want that.
Yep.
If you bring that to me, I appreciate it a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, so that's sort of how I look at it from that perspective then if somebody has reached a different worldview, because they can still
Sure.
have, they can still be a person of faith, which is also how Rhett describes himself now. And that's why I'm, reflecting now on the way I introduce this. I think that,
Mhm.
looking at faith as something that is towards your overall like belief system is
Yeah.
actually a bad thing. I think that the idea of Christianity, and that's why I wish I had specified this earlier.
Mhm.
Faith is good when you are trusting in God after you've established He exists. But
Very good.
in establishing His existence, you should seek to limit the faith you need. and that's why it can be,
Okay.
yeah, so that's like,
You
growing in faith.
you'd prefer to lean on the reason part,
Yeah, oh, you're
not the faith
supposed to.
part.
There's actually a verse that I also
Okay,
have
great.
prepared, that I wanted to read, but, oh, I think what happened was is I entered it in, and I don't think it's saved correctly because I
Fine.
copied.
Can you can you tell me what it is? I'll search for it.
Yeah, so it's, crap. Oh, man, I don't remember what the it was. I'm so bummed, like, because I had it
Okay.
all prepared, and then it
Do you
just
have
went.
a keyword?
Yeah, so it was, Jesus's parable to planting seeds for reaping a crop. It was like planting it in rocks versus
Sure.
planting it in soil. Luke 8, yeah, I found it. Luke 8,
So
5
wherever
through
uh
15. Luke 8, 5 through 15.
Okay.
So mad. I literally had it copy pasted into my thing. That's so annoying.
Fine.
I had it all prepared, like, I had the verses out, and then, they just didn't save because I have the thing saved that I was gonna look at. Oh, wait, I'm stupid. I do have it saved. I'm just I had to so I have my notes up on half my screen, but I have it minimized to a small degree, and I just had to scroll over to the right.
Okay.
But,
That's fine.
yeah, I did have it.
A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell along the path, and was trampled underfoot, and the birds of the air devoured it. And some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, withered away, and because it had no moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and choked it. And some fell into good soil, and yielded 100-fold. And he said these things, he called out, He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Should I
Yeah.
continue?
No, that's pretty
Okay.
much it, and so
Okay.
you can look at this from. I mean, actually, there is really one way to look at this, and that's how you reach a conclusion and what that can look like in terms of how you develop it. And
Hmm.
basically, it's saying that it's unwise to plant things on a rocky soil because
You
they'll
just waste
grow.
your seed. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll grow
So many
quick,
ways
but
to waste.
it won't have a defined structure that
Hmm.
will protect it from other things, and that's where, like, if you use that would be like rocks and its fast growth would probably be ascertainable to faith filling in those gaps because,
Hmm.
somebody who doesn't seek the reason and understanding for why Jesus did raise from the dead is
Yeah.
someone who may just be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna believe this because I want it to be true, and I'm not gonna pay attention to any of the reason logic." You'll be really strong in your beliefs
Yeah.
because you can reach that 100% certainty.
You'll be a
But then
quick
someone
weed
comes
and
along and says,
drop.
"Hey, what about this?" And all of a sudden, that faith goes out the window because it's not a fortified structure. So, like, you should
Okay.
seek to fortify your beliefs in things based in reason, like the firm and rich soil that causes the plant to grow in a fruitful way.
Hmm.
That is equivalent, like, and then, like, the other Christian perspective is that God is the one who makes all the plants grow, but, like,
Hmm.
your choice in fortifying each of those is what's going to establish your eventual plant that you get, and that plant is going to be representative to your belief structure.
Okay.
Um, and so I like this verse because I think it shows how the way that everything I'm saying correlates with the Bible. And, like, my Christian beliefs, because, like, I think a big thing is you want to be consistent with your own religion if you're going to then say something about it. And so there's definitely consistency in the fact that Christianity does not want you to just believe something because you either want to believe it or because you think that it's important to have more faith in something like that. It's almost more noble to believe something without having to invest in the apologetics or the um, uh, historical components to the transcripts and things like that. It's like, oh, I don't need to study Hebrew because I have more faith in you, and it's like like you may need that, but I don't. I'm better. Like that. That's
Hmm.
entirely false equivalence to, like, understanding what a strong belief structure is and what a lot of faith is. And yeah, I think that's important to establish. I wish I had said that earlier because I
Hmm.
realized that it can be dicey because faith can also be a bad thing then in that sense,
Hmm.
in the way it's used. So it's like,
Yeah. Faith can be misdirecting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Supper asks, if you have faith in that a particular thing will happen, meaning you had 100% confidence, but then that event does not occur, would that mean that you were incorrect, that you had 100% confidence, or incorrect? What? How would you deal with having faith about a thing and then seeing that it did not happen?
So I want to make it clear, you can be 100% wrong. You can
Okay.
be 100% confident in the wrong thing. Just because you're wrong doesn't mean that you are 100% confident, because being 100% confident is different than being 100% correct. And those are two very different things. And so, um, now, what would be the problem in that? As we mentioned before, it can be the way in which you applied faith to a
Mhm.
system to remove some of the reason logic that was like healthy to
Mhm.
what would be a fortified belief.
Yes.
Or it could be that your fortification in the reason and logic was actually faulty. Like
Yeah.
scientists who don't utilize faith pretty much at all, they avoid it like the plague, which I think is a good thing. And with their practice and their
Good ones,
purpose,
yes.
they still get things wrong. I mean, we used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe,
Sure.
and that was based on a lot of reasonable, logical conclusions,
Very
like the
much.
stars moving around us. Like, if they're moving around
Yeah.
us, we must be the center. And so
It was the
that was
reasonable
100%
conclusion
wrong.
2,500 years. Totally.
What?
2,500 years ago, it was the reasonable conclusion.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, like, you can be 100% wrong, and that was not because they misapplied faith. That was
Mhm.
because they just, I mean, maybe I don't wanna pick at the weeds to what, application of faith went on to reach that conclusion, but you can certainly be wrong without having any misapplication of faith. And so, yeah, that's how I would
Cool,
answer
cool.
that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Next week, I think around the same time is the plan, we're going to have Q&A with you.
Yes,
So all the audience, this is your time. Nathan's gonna open himself up and let you just pummel him with everything. Uh,
please.
and
I love
that'll be great.
answer me
Uh,
with, I love the challenge. So answer, like, say, "I think everything you believe is false, and tell me why,"
yeah.
basically.
If for some reason, you're in the audience and you'd like to add a question, uh, and you're not able to attend, just email me at jugglinglessons@gmail.com and I will include it. Also, my DMs on Discord are open. Username Juggling Lessons, all lowercase. So, would you like to summarize for us what you're defining faith as, and if there's any reflections or learnings and conclusions that you've come to through this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So in summary, I think it's important to understand faith as a means of communicating from religious perspectives to secular perspectives, because even within our religion we get it wrong sometimes. We can have misconceptions. It's oftentimes so easily overlapping with other components that establish belief, like trust and reason. And so the biggest thing to remember is that faith is is that gap. It's that gap that anyone will need to reach 100% confidence in anything. And
Mhm,
so because it's a gap, it's not always good. But in Christianity, we consider a good thing to have an affordability to a gap for things that God will then throw at you, which may not have as much observation and reason. So, growing in faith, as this, I guess, would be the second point, growing in faith can be a good thing when it is applied in a way that is trusting to God and the processes that go along with Christianity, as in trusting Him to provide for you financially or set you along a path that's going to be honoring to Him. Those components may not have as much reason, and that's where growing in faith is important.
mhm,
And then the final thing, I guess, in reflection is, like, what faith has meant to me. And I think, it's incredibly important for everyone who wants to explore Christianity to basically prepare themselves for a personal revelational experience that can change them. And like that's going to be rooted sometimes in things that aren't as applicable to reason and logic. You may be like, oh, like I feel really great in this, and like I don't
mhm,
understand why. Um, that's going to be some of that, what I believe to be conviction presented by God that will then set you along a path to then maybe move from a purely faith-based belief. If you want to start, like, if you want to be like, okay, I want to explore Christianity, I want to
mhm,
say, I'm going to start off with saying, I believe Jesus to have resurrected from the dead. I'm going to pray for his,
mhm,
entrance into my heart and like his is influence over my remainder of my life. I want to start at that point. Okay, well, that may be on, purely faith based, but then everything that you're going to go through is going to work to then break down some of that faith so that you then build up in reason and logic. And that may be ridden with these different convictions that come from like pleasant feelings and overall experience of joy that you hadn't had before. And so those components are going to be different. And that's what I think uh, can be a reflection to, what this looks like in what I talked about today. But yeah,
Okay. Thank you very much. Very much. I'm already collecting questions for next week.
awesome. Yeah, I
There's already
also
a couple showing up, and we will address them next week. Thank you much. See you. Oh, I will wave with my new magic wand tip. If you wave, then the broadcast will end. Bye bye.